Okay, the purpose of this video is I just wanted to document how I've been doing worm composting for the last year. Took it over from my partner who was doing it in her basement, and I've been getting much better results due to some changes I made. I've done worm composting a few different times, um, come up against some common frustrations are that getting the worms out, getting the right kind of bedding, and finding out which kind of stuff they like to eat and don't like to eat. So I wanted to show what I've been doing for bedding. So for a lot of the things you read, we'll say use newspaper. Just shred up newspaper. That's what I've done for a long time. Two things that I don't like about it is one, so much newspaper these days have colored ink in it, and the black ink should be safe now. It's usually some kind of organic dye these days, but the colors I don't trust. The other thing I don't like about them is they have a tendency when they get wet to clump, so you'll have like these mats of paper, and you'll have like chunks, like good compost and a lot of it, but then there'll be like these chunks of just newspaper. And eventually I guess it all breaks down, but to speed it up, you have to like kind of reach in there and break it up. And I did try using brown paper, so like paper bags, stuff like that. That worked okay. I felt like it was probably better in terms of not having mysterious inks and those kind of additions to it. But it had the same clumping problem. It didn't break down any easier. So when I really started getting better results is when I moved to what I used to use when I did this some years ago, and that was using leaves, dried leaves. So that's what I've been using pretty much the whole year, save sometimes when we use some paper. But this is almost, except for one, there was a little bit of paper down a few layers that my partner used when she composted 1 week. And I did notice that those are layers that are clumping. Everything else looks really nice. The brown leaves, I added stuff about, I don't know, a couple weeks ago. The brown leaves, they just love it. It goes great. It immediately turns into nice stuff. And even if it's not all broken down, if you were composting a little bit quickly, you've just got brown organic matter. It seems a lot better than just weird paper in your garden. The only thing I'd say about it is that the stems tend to stick around. So you get like this stemmy kind of stuff. You may not actually see it much here because I started using another material. When I turn it in a bit, it'll probably come up. So it's really not an issue. It's not a problem. It just makes it. I'm kind of aiming for some really pretty worm castings that are just really plain. Actually, I guess I'm basically there. Um, Main thing is I ran out of leaves, so I was switching to other material. Now I have fresh leaves from the fall, but and I'll start using them eventually. But what I really like are the brown leaves that have broken down just a tiny bit. So like the leaves in a pile once you get to spring, if it's a nice covered pile. So what I'm using now is leftover straw or hay from the hay bale gardening I did this year. And this I think is going to be fantastic. I kind of mixed it. Yeah, I mixed it with the last of my leaf mixture, which the bottom of the pile was basically dirt. So I didn't think it was great, like ideal for the worm composting anyway, but now I think this is going to be the best stuff ever. All right. So what I do is, my philosophy for worm composting is kind of considered it a little bit of a craft, because if you put in it a little more effort, when you add the compost, you'll just have a much better, quicker, nicer, cleaner, totally non-smelly process. So for instance, I never do this. This was my partner's doing, and I thought it was a nice experiment. I was away, but she said she didn't have time to do the whole thing. So she just threw these apple peelings on the top, and we were going to see whether the worms would eat them. I came down and there were worms underneath them, but if these were thrown in a week ago underneath, they would be gone. So I think the verdict is you don't efficiently compost with worms by throwing the compost just on top. You have to bury it, and eventually, if it's not eaten by the worms quickly, it's going to rot and smell and everything. So you definitely want to bury it. That's not a shortcut to take. So the other thing is to get. Let's see. Hold on a second. I'm gonna get the compost. Okay, I'm back with all the ingredients. So the ingredients are going to be the food scraps, the vegetable scraps. Got quite an abundance of them. Possibly, we'll see, possibly too much. Yeah, I've got a lot. It might be a little much for both of these. We'll see. The brown ingredients, and what I'm going to do is take out some of these, throw it in here, and get it wet. So I basically never water my compost. Water my worm bin. People talk about doing that, but I've pretty much found that as long as you get your brown saturated when you add the stuff, and then if you have any residue of water on the bottom of the bucket, to just adding that. Plus, I guess I've been recently recycling any of the compost tea, as they describe it, the drippings at the bottom, which, if I'm gardening, I'll pour them outside, but if I'm not, I'll just recycle it through the compost. But that's all I need. And then the last ingredient, which is optional, but helpful, is ground up eggshells. From what I hear, the calcium in this really improves the reproduction of the earthworms, and also I think they need a little bit of grit in their gut to be able to chew through the stuff they eat, and this gives a little grit. I actually want to experiment with adding a little sand too in the future, some fine sand. But anyway, they seem to be having no problem eating a lot and reproducing, so I think we're doing great. Now, a common mistake, I think it's a mistake at least, is people will add eggshells to their worm composting, or their regular composting, and they'll just take their eggs and just basically throw them in like this, or maybe break them up like that. And I don't think it really helps at all, hardly at all, if you do that. It certainly doesn't help the worms, because if it's not small enough to enter their little mouths, they're not eating it. And I see them in regular compost piles, and you just see these broken up chunks, and then you see it in the soil you've added to, and it lasts for years. It takes for ages for it to break down into something that will combine with the soil and add calcium and other minerals to the soil. So I really think the only way that you get this into use is if you grind it up like this. And I do it. One time I just pounded it with like a mortar in a pot, like a mortar and pestle, and Eventually I could grind it pretty small, like, about like that, especially if I like sifted it and stuff. And it felt like it was kind of fun feeling like it was like, you know, pounding grain in ancient times or something, but it was really time consuming. What works better is just to take an old coffee grinder, and when you fill up one of these, once it's full and you can't put any more in there, just it takes about maybe 15 minutes to grind through all this in a coffee maker, and then you'll have, like this. This will probably end up with about that much, and this will last. I mean, this will probably last me like 2 months. Well, that much there. This will probably last me a couple weeks. You can add more or less, however you want. But yeah, I've never had a problem with a shortage of this. Our egg consumption pretty much matches what we need for the compost. Okay, so those are the ingredients. The things that I try to keep out of the ingredients are, I keep 2 compost, like food scrap buckets on the counter in my kitchen. And the one is, it's kind of faded away now. Well, there it is the stuff for the worms. And the other is the stuff that is not for the worms. And mainly that's onions and citrus peels. There are probably a few other things, but those are the main ones. Those, I find, they just stick in there. They don't like to eat those things. So I just keep them out. Personally, I could get really kind of ridiculous with this stuff. Like little sprouts will form in the bins, germinating seeds. So if it wasn't for the fact that I live with somebody else who's not going to do it, I would even keep the seedy things like pepper seeds, stuff like that. Actually, when I use them, I throw them in here. But they end up, it's not a big deal. But I think if you were trying to get absolutely perfect worm castings without any seeds in them or anything that's sprouted, you'd keep out the seedy vegetables. Or maybe like grind them up, put them in a blender or something. Pour hot water on them, maybe boiling water. I don't know, whatever. That's not important really, though. Okay. It is. I would advise doing this separation though, because you'll just have slimy onions and moldy citrus peels mixed in with your otherwise perfect compost. All right, so we're going to take the next step and fill this up with water. And this is seeming, I'll put a little bit more in. That should be plenty. Actually, you know what? I should go a little lighter. Sometimes I use too much of this, and then I have to collect more. I go for about half and half. Maybe a little bit more brown. Actually, probably about half and half. They've got all this other stuff. It doesn't have to be quite as much as when you're composting normally, because the worms are basically eating the stuff. And yeah, I don't think you have to have quite the same ratio of the balance. Some people, I think, don't even do it at all, and I guess it works out. But in my opinion, it definitely works way, way, way better if you've got some of these dry browns in it. Okay, so let me get that ready, and then we'll do a little demonstration of how to put the stuff in. Okay, all right, I've got my now saturated mixture, and if these had been a little more full, I would have used this liquid first. It's not very brown and dense, so it's not even very good tea, but there's still plenty of space. So there's the way we created these worm bins. You don't have to you don't have to buy any fancy thing. You can spend $300 on a worm bin. All you really need is something like this. We have 2 containers, drilled holes in one for the at the bottom for the worm bins. This other one, I've also got worm holes on the side. I thought I'd get more air in that way. I haven't really noticed whether it makes any difference having those extra air holes. The main thing is just having holes in the bottom so the water can drip out. And then, I've got these blocks down there to raise it up, and just take them out and check. And if it's filling up too much, you don't want the water to saturate the bottom, just drain it out. Either mix it back in by putting it in the grounds, or put it on your plants. All right. Okay, this is going to be a little awkward because I don't have somebody else helping me film. So I'm having to do this one-handed here. So basically, we'll start this side. You just want to bury it. So dig up about, 4 inches, 4 inches, 5 inches, whatever. Enough that you'll be able to bury it. And then you see how many worms are in there. It can get crazy. When I harvest these, I really, I've been building up my stock so much that when I harvest them, next time I have to give some away because I just don't have enough worms to take care of the compost, or have too many worms to take care of the compost, and they start running away. All right, so then I just throw down some of the brown. Squeeze it out a little bit. And take some of the vegetable scraps. Nice out there. For a few more on top here. Just mix that in a little bit. And get then sprinkle in some of the eggshells. Put that in there. Okay. And then cover up. And some people, if you got one bin, you can do just half the bin at a time and go back and forth between them every week or so. But since we have 2 bins, I just do the whole bin. Half, and then get the other half. So, and it does take a little more time than your typical compost bin where you're just dumping the stuff in. But if you're a compost turner, which most people are, it's not necessary, but you get a nicer, less nasty composting process when you can turn it and get air. That takes time. So I don't feel like this is really a lot more than that, and you're doing it inside. You can keep composting through the winter. That's a big plus. I don't even use an outdoor bin during the winter because there's no compost activity that can happen in Wisconsin in the winter. Why don't we go through all that? Oh, you know what? I think I may end up using all the scraps I got. Okay, bananas, peelings are great. I'm just kind of ridiculous. If this was my banana peel, when I put it in, I would shred it so they can eat it even a little bit faster. But they're gonna love all this stuff. Yeah. All right, we'll go with that. More. So if I'm really busy, then this feels like a pain in the butt. But if I've got a little bit of time, it takes about 15 or 20 minutes, I'd say, to do this whole thing. But it's kind of nice, and I really like these worms. Like I have quite a fondness for the worms, and I try not to. This is my time with the worms. I really appreciate them. Um, when I harvest, I really try to like. There's always a little bit of death that happens with this, but I try to minimize it because they've done their part. So I try to treat them well. So this is my time to say hello to my friends who are helping me compost. And there you have it. Actually, did I forget to? I think I forgot to put. I was talking and I forgot to put in the. I think I forgot to put in this. Put it there. It doesn't really matter if you forget once or run out of your stuff. But anyway, okay. So there you have it. And then I'll pour. My hands are free. I'll pour the excess. I need to get more for the other side, but at the end I'll just pour a little drippings on the top, moisten the top, and then that'll be plenty of water for them. I won't need to worry about adding water anytime. So that's about it. Harvesting is another beast. I am still working on the perfect way of doing it. There probably is no perfect way. And I'll save that for another time. It's coming up probably in the next 2 weeks to a month. I'll need to harvest. I am running out of room. All right, well, if anybody watches this, I hope you found it useful.